Hey Barry, good morning.
Morning.
All right. Is my audio coming through okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, good. All right. So I know I've made reference to Beth a few times now. She said that Zoom was not working for her yesterday, so her son had to come over and fix it for her. So she did say she was very enthusiastic to attend, so she thinks she
Okay.
may be able to come today. We'll see.
Okay. I see you're still celebrating the 4th with your costumery.
I would say, I would have worn it on the fourth. Actually, I did wear it on the fourth. No, wait, did I wear it on the fourth? I wore it on the third. I did not wear it on the fourth because I didn't go anywhere on the fourth, other than a local walk. And then yesterday on this session, it's kind of a minor protest, but I do love this country. I just think it's deplorable what has happened to it.
You can love
But
the country and hate the government.
yeah, I, specifically, the idiot in chief and his minions.
Yeah. It's sad. It's grim, it's deplorable, it's sad, it's disheartening.
Yeah.
There's Eric.
Hello.
Good morning, Eric. Good morning, Stacey.
Good morning.
Sam's wrapped in the flag.
Yeah.
I normally wear this every fourth,
Hmm.
but this year I didn't quite feel like it yesterday.
Yeah, the holiday doesn't mean what it used to.
No, it's basically a memorial service. Oh, geez, a wasp just came into my. Man, these wasps are hard to kill.
You're not talking about a Protestant.
No, those are easier. Well, not from personal experience,
Okay.
but
Yeah, the government's watching what we say here, so be careful.
I don't know. I doubt the government understands anything that I write because nobody understands anything I write.
I remember your derivatives. That's what that's what I found amazing. You're connecting math to emotions.
Oh yeah. Well, that was probably my most important contribution um, overall because it's unique and it wasn't just doing a job that other could have done. If I didn't do it, it probably wouldn't have happened for, well, I'll say forever, but
And that's the key, finding something in math that models something in the real world.
yeah. Oh, and that reminds me, yesterday you weren't here yesterday. Yesterday I did something not as deep as that, but on this along the same lines. I made a quadrant model with two different axes. And first I wrote it up in chat, and then Sean and others said, make a diagram of it. So first I went to Gemini. Gemini couldn't do diagrams. So I went to Claude, and Claude did a very nice job of expanding on it and then putting it into a diagram, which I then posted on Facebook and elsewhere.
Mhm. Great.
But it was a riff on something Stacey had given a kind of a long, not say long-winded, but an extended rant. Was it a rant? I don't know if it was a rant, but whatever it was. And I was basically writing down some notes to sort of capture the essence of it, and then I just mapped it into a mathematical quadrant model. It was more than what she said, but it was inspired by what she said.
And using Cartesian coordinates. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
a lot of the work I've done is you take two different values, which are sort of independent, and if you plot them on a quadrant, then you can sort of get directions in which both values are achieved or not achieved, and so that putting creating a multidimensional space is a recurring technique that I've used to analyze
Mhm.
things and to structure them. which is a very mathematical thing to do,
Sure.
especially when it's not obvious that it's like space and time. That was a classical one. You put space on this axis and time on that axis, and that's a big deal in physics.
Yeah, when I was in college, they had quadrants for everything
Right.
in business school, trying
Right.
to explain economics and everything.
And orthants, if you have three dimensions, you have orthants. And in my case, phase plane, where you had derivatives in the different first, second, or function, first and second derivative in a three-dimensional phase space, which is, I mean, I don't know how often calculus courses include that. They really ought to put a phase space in a, say, freshman calculus. You would think it'd be a useful thing to do.
Just multiple dimensions with math, just in
Right.
general, how to do that. It's useful.
Yeah. Or in motion, you have yaw, pitch, and what's the other one?
Roll.
Roll.
Roll. Yeah, roll, yaw, and pitch. You've got that's classical in air travel or space travel.
One of the mathematical oh God, how do I say this? One of the things that I try to say that I think is so simple that it often gets overlooked is that I try to get people to think in terms of a circle as opposed to a square, because I don't think people recognize that waves bend or time bends or water bends, or I don't know what the words are to use, but I think we have to stop thinking in terms of rigid lines like a square and recognize the curves.
Yep. Yeah. And
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 so even in that Facebook post, I don't know if you saw the comment I made, which is I wish that we could see a 3D diagram and use a sphere.
yeah. Um, Leonard Euler is a famous mathematician who really, really took that to great depth, uh, doing things with the circle and complex numbers that just will knock your socks off if you bother to delve into it. It's very,
Yeah,
it turns out to be a very, very powerful technique.
and all the non-Euclidean geometries that are possible,
Right.
things like Poincare spaces.
Yeah. Fair curves. When you design a ship hull, if you want what's called a fair curve, you take a piece of, say, wood that you can easily bend, and if you bend a piece of wood, it makes what's called a fair curve. It's a very nice, smooth curve. Doesn't have any kinks in it. Uh,
Mhm.
the rate at which it bends is very nicely, um, possibly even linear amount of bending along the length of it. So you get or when you have the drooping power lines, the catenary curves, they have a very nice uh, mathematical property.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have the ability to go to be that complex. So I can just keep saying, start at the center
Mhm.
and behave like a compass and make a circle and fill in the center.
Well, there's that book Flatland, which was a two-dimensional world, and then the sequel was Sphereland, and they made that into a movie. So if you think of us as two-dimensional people living on the surface of a sphere, and you could blow it up like a balloon, it's an expanding universe or a contracting universe.
Well, I'm a three-dimensional.
Most
Yeah,
people have trouble thinking beyond three dimensions because your brain, you just don't have any experience in four-dimensional spaces, even though mathematically they're a very powerful construct. It's hard to get any intuition with them.
right. But that gives you an analogy. If you think about living on the surface of a balloon,
Right.
well, maybe that we all are in a balloon in the fourth dimension and expanding universe. Everything is drifting apart. We're all drifting apart from each other. Help.
We're schisming, polarizing, or whatever you want to call it.
Yep. And then one day there'll be a big crunch, maybe.
Well, or just slow heat death or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
Things
but,
just, old soldiers never die, they just fade away.
right. But while we're still alive, what can we do?
Fade to black. Jump cut versus fade to black or yeah, and in video you fade between scenes as opposed to cutting
Yeah,
and
cross
fading.
dissolve.
Yeah, cross dissolve and fading or smooth transitions,
Hmm.
morphing the figure between two different shapes.
Sometimes I use the cube effect, like yeah, in a video. No, but really, thinking about, I posted a video about the millennial generation, how they think, and how it's different than the way we think, and how are we supposed to get along, and how are they supposed to recognize the value of our help and resources. So it's an interesting topic if anyone wants to riff on that.
You mean the topic of generations?
Yeah, well, yeah, like if you think about how millennials are growing up, the way they're entering the workforce now and starting careers, starting families, how are they approaching life different than yeah, older generations?
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh, my 14-year-old and his friend gave me an insight into their generation. They didn't realize that they were Generation Alpha because they're the beginning of that generation. But they
What's
were telling me that they just feel like their generation is a little bit more depressed, and they're actually very curious as to how they're going to grow up.
Yeah, anyone who grew up during COVID, I could understand that.
Exactly.
Let's see one new message. Oh,
Yeah, and then combine that with perceptions about politics and leadership and opportunities going forward, and yeah, big changes in what they were taught as kids about climate and energy, and now seeing policies that are dismantling that. Well, yeah, what are they supposed to think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have, let's see, I have a friend that's actually Gen Z, who has children, and then most of my friends are millennials, a lot younger than me. Aren't they older now? Like they're in their 30s.
Yeah,
well, if they were born in their 90s, then yeah, they'd be in their 30s, wouldn't they?
yeah, my nephew's 32 and he's got two kids and he's got a good job, but still, anything raising a family, it's a big challenge.
My one friend who is a millennial who said that from her perspective, a lot of what's happening in the world, a lot of bad things, is the last of my generation. She said, sorry, but it's your generation that's messing things up. And of course, I blame everything on the boomers. Like, no, not me.
Remember the Who song talking about my generation? Blame it on them. They messed it up.
Yeah.
Blame it on the hippies. I don't know. Yeah, everyone wants to blame, but
Oh, of course.
yeah.
Oh, my generation left the current generation into a pickle.
Yeah, that's a really good topic. It's a wide topic. You can talk about how different generations, how mental health was affected by, from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like the Polynesians and other ancient tribal people back in the day, like the Native Americans, they have that same, you have to look 7 generations ahead.
Was that against 7 generations?
Yeah, plan for 7 generations ahead. Or it
Okay.
takes 7 generations to clear up a mistake.
So was that
Huh.
210 years?
Yeah.
Um,
And we're talking yesterday about the Fermi paradox, where a civilization makes a mistake and they never recover from it. They just die out. And maybe
Yeah.
it's going to happen to us. Maybe we're illustrating the Fermi paradox, why there are no alien civilizations ever detected evidence of. They get to our point and then they screw it up and die off. Green eggs.
well, did that happen already with Atlantis, or is that a fairy tale?
Well, yeah, Atlantis is a legend. I don't know if there's any basis to the story of Atlantis or not, to tell you the truth. Although with sea level rise, there are places that are going to get submerged.
We might be Atlantis.
Although I heard that countries on coral reefs don't get submerged because the coral keeps growing.
Hmm.
So that actually the coral islands keep growing bigger and bigger as the sea level rises, which I didn't never thought of that, but I guess there's evidence to demonstrate that coral islands don't get submerged. That is, if it happens slow enough. Obviously, if you have a super flooding, but you can't, you really can't super flood the ocean. It's too big.
So is coral just the accumulation of microorganisms
Yeah,
over
it's
time?
the coral are actually little animals, polyps. And so they grow and they make their little coral nest and they keep growing and it's just
So they just keep building on their parents,
keep,
building on
keep
their grandparents.
yeah, it's like a totem pole. They just built on previous generations. And so coral islands are not as much in danger as you might have thought naively.
Well, do you know the story of Devil's Tower in Wyoming? I think it is.
I've,
The,
I've
the
been I've been there, but I don't remember if there's any legends. I guess there are legends.
There is a legend about some Native American girls who ran away from their tribe to dance, and then there were wolves hunting them. So they prayed to the rock, "Rock, help us!" And then it just rose up into the air, and then they became the Pleiades.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah, yeah. I
that's
mean,
fun.
these stories are fascinating.
It's
I heard that
amazing.
on Cosmos.
Yeah, it's amazing how people can make up stories that become legends and myths, and
Hmm.
oh, but they have no basis in fact. They're just imaginations running wild.
Well, how do we know what we hold true isn't really a story or
A
imagination?
lot of it is. We're not very good at weeding out the misconceptions.
Hmm.
I mean, even science has trouble weeding out misconceptions. A lot of misconceptions that persisted in science, a lot of them through the 20th century.
Yep. The luminiferous ether,
Yeah,
one
which
of
is
them.
kind of coming back a little bit.
Yeah.
Versions of it are coming back.
Hmm.
What is the
And there's
lumen?
another one that the universe is actually rotating, which gives it some centrifugal force, and maybe that's why it's expanding.
What
And
is the luminiscer? Yeah, what is the luminiferous ether? Whatever it is you said.
stuff that basically, when you think of a wave, you think of the medium that the wave travels through, like air or water. And so the question was, what does light travel through? And they invented this thing called the ether, the
Oh,
luminiferous ether that light travels through. And then the Michelson-Morley experiment and Einstein overthrew that, says there isn't any. Light just travels through free space. But now space is sort of some kind of a new ether, that space has some kind of a subatomic structure that's really mind-boggling to ponder.
But at that time, there were mathematicians who built their career on calculations for the luminiferous ether.
Right, exactly.
And then what happens when it's overthrown? Uh-oh, what do I
And
do now?
and that led
but
to the
did the
question, is the speed of gravity equal to the speed of light? And the answer is yes, but it was not obvious how to establish that either through measurement or through theory.
well, wait a minute. Did the properties of the ether like change with climate and things like that?
No. I mean, if when light travels through the air, yeah, then the air the stuff in the air does slow the light down. But when light travels through empty space, it's a different story. And that's why the speed of light is the same for all observers in all directions. Well, that's more than that, but it's not obvious why the speed of light should be the same for all observers in all directions, regardless of the motion of the observer. That's anti-Galilean, but it was somehow established and demonstrated in basic physics. That's a
See, what I'm
space time.
learning is yeah, Einstein depended on a lot of people before him, most notably Riemann, for his fourth dimensional calculations to get his theory of the gravity, um, general relativity. And that depended on a whole bunch of sort of accidents.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the life stories of these people, yeah, a lot of them could have died and never given anything to the next generation to build on. Riemann only lived to 40, I think.
And the first two people who worked on statistical mechanics committed suicide.
Hmm.
It was Boltzmann was one, and I forget who the other one was.
Hmm. Yeah, so let's appreciate the history that's gotten all our little conveniences that we take for granted now. There's lots of accidents in history.
Did they commit suicide at the age of 40?
I have
Probably.
to look that one up. I don't know.
Ask ChatGPT, whatever you don't know.
That's okay. That's okay.
Is that what we're becoming? Yeah, or you saw the like Sabine Hofstenfelder's video, how AI is dumbing us, making us all dumb.
Yeah. And in a sense, she's right. I mean, I don't do arithmetic in my head. I never was very good at it, and now I don't ever do it at all. You know, memorizing the times tables and stuff like that. Nobody does that anymore.
And I could tell just by when I was using it more often that I was just like accepting its answers and not wanting to dig anymore. It's like it, there's a psychological effect, and now I'm using it less and
Yeah,
trying to dig more into books and old forms of research.
I'm doing the same thing.
The
Mhm.
questions that I ask, it tells me it can't find the information. So I'm not pleased with it.
So is there going to be a backlash now? AI backlash. The Luddites rise again.
What was that law they passed that they can't regulate AI for 10 years or
Yeah,
something?
that's in the the
Big ugly
huge,
bill, yeah.
yeah, huge bill. Right.
Yeah,
Big
chances.
ugly.
Yeah.
But the federal government can pass legislation. It's just that the states don't have the right to do it.
Well, yeah, that one you have to ask some lawyers about whether the
They have to
states.
wait for the feds to come up with something.
Right,
They can't do it on their own.
right.
And I think it probably is only interstate commerce where it's effective, but
Yeah,
everything's interstate now.
AI. Yeah, anything on the internet is basically interstate. So I don't know.
But there's no reason that I can say, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. There's no reason that someone on a state level couldn't write something up and submit it to somebody on a federal level and have them submit it.
Well, the states can also determine whether the state is allowed to employ AIs for certain applications because it's just, it's either you want rather have people or you can't rely on the AI to not be subtly biased.
No, but I think that the real issue is that it's easier to pass something on a state level. It's easier to not fight the battles on a state level that it is on a federal level.
You got 50 chances in parallel to do it on at least one out of 50
Right,
states because you
right.
only got one federal government and
I
that
mean,
tends
a
to get tied
practical
up.
example is protecting young kids from harmful AI. So if you wanted to write a law for that and a state wanted to put that in, well, is that now okay, if it was interstate commerce, then I think the feds would get involved there.
And if the states are going to have more power over educational curriculum, then the
Yeah,
states can decide to what extent AI belongs in or out of aspects of education and the curriculum.
yeah, and really, legislation can't do much to control the technology.
Yeah.
It's only if somebody complains that gets a case in a court system that this AI caused this kid to commit suicide or something like that.
There was a story where students can use computers and AI in their homework, but on a final exam, they take away your phone, and they did much poorer on the exams. They took away your phone than on your homework, where you could use any resources you wanted to.
But when they get into the workplace, it won't matter.
Probably not. I mean, except for maybe for creative problem solving, there's no advantage to AI. Possibly, I don't know.
Well, see, that's another generational thing. Are kids growing up with teamwork more than individual work?
Yeah,
Well, they're definitely growing up more connected.
Sure.
that's true. That's absolutely true. I mean, I have contacts all over the planet. I certainly didn't have that growing up in Omaha. I didn't have contacts outside of my neighborhood very much. Certainly not outside of Nebraska. I mean,
Yeah, I don't remember who I was talking to, but I was complaining about how my kids love just staying home. They don't have a desire. Like Damien didn't have a desire to drive, but he's being kind of sort of forced to drive. He has to drive to work now, and there's only so much public transportation I'm sure that he would want to take. But somebody had told me it's because I don't know, maybe one of you guys. It's because they don't have to. Like they can talk to their friends
right.
on the computer. They can watch Netflix on the computer. They can interact with each other even on a game, a different game. They don't even have to go outside. They could just like go on to the different game that somebody created
Yeah.
and get a rise out of that.
We've
It's really
come,
interesting.
we've come a long way since telegraph and telephone in terms of telepresence.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to teach my kids like the to be aware of the dangers of it. You know, don't buy into anybody's weird trend. Like, who cares? It just like comes down to it too, is to just try to think for yourself, think logically, just try to get ahead of whatever. Like if anyways, I'm not going to even go towards that conversation of me lecturing my kids. So
And what do they really listen to? Is how do you get your credibility across to,
Well,
to their
what they're
mind?
listening to with the headphones, you don't know what they're listening to. It used to be that if they had the radio or the phonograph on, you knew what they were listening to, but now you don't.
And when they get brain implants in the future, you'll have no idea what they're thinking. It's
some
coming.
people need brain implants though.
Yeah.
Shortening of attention span, same
So I'm
sense.
using AI as an augmented brain when I do word puzzles on, the internet and I get stuck, I go talk to Gemini or Claude and they they're about on par with me on the heart. When I get stuck, they're about on par with me. Sometimes they get it, and sometimes they also get stuck. I actually had Gemini throw in the towel and give up on one word problem that tried every which way and it didn't work. And I now think that maybe the web page had made a mistake and presented it wrong, or the code screwed up because it just didn't have an answer. But you sort of assume that there is an answer. But I had at least a couple cases where I reloaded the same problem that didn't appear the same way the second time. That's odd.
Yeah, people need to understand AI does things differently with language versus algorithms and the
and
traditional programming.
and rolling the dice. I mean, AI
Yeah.
rolls the dice, so
Yep.
the same thing. And probably a lot of software is going to be like that, where it's not identical 2 times in a row, but it'll be slight variations on a theme. It's like music, it's variations on a theme. Some are exactly the same twice. Maybe small differences, maybe, jazz and scat and ragtime and intentional perturbations.
Now, what's interesting is there was backlash when electronic instruments started being used in the 70s or so.
Yeah.
The traditional, like the jazz community, certain people said, no way, use the string upright bass. And all that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but people get entrenched. And so, yeah, how do people handle change when, how are we handling change, first of all?
We're using paper money now. We don't handle change. It's actually true. I don't put coins in my pocket anymore.
A lot of places don't accept cash anymore.
Yeah. Although I think that's technically illegal. I think the wording on the money is a legal tender for all trade or something like that. You can't actually, although on the internet, of course, you have to use something other than money. You've got to use.
Well, there are stores where they won't
take money.
accept cash, or these certain terminals on the grocery store.
Oh, where you have to use a card. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to use a card, right?
My mother told me yesterday that she never learned how to pump gas. She drives to Jersey to get it.
That's right, yeah.
I tried doing that for like a month when they first stopped pumping gas in New York. I tried just like playing dumb, like, oh, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? And then I had to learn.
Actually, pumping gas is pretty easy these days. I mean, nothing terribly complicated about it.
I still try to drive to Jersey when I can.
All right. Well, half an hour. Should we have an actual topic other than just?
Green Egg says we've been riffing and just between two men. Yeah, how do we include the women more in our riffs then?
I guess we go back to shutting up.
I thought we had some good conversation going earlier.
Do we have a topic?
No. Nothing, certainly not a fresh one.
Go ahead, Kayla.
Oh, no, my dog is he's arguing with the next door neighbor's dog. Hey, stop.
Okay, put that through a language model. I want to know what the dogs are saying.
Yeah. That's a good thing for AI decoding mammal speak, but
no.
Yep.
whale speak or whatever.
Yeah, the whale is an interesting topic.
There's a good chance that they'll develop a way to decode animal communication signals.
Did you guys see I don't know if you guys watch any television, but there's a documentary about a woman named Ocean Ramsey who swims with sharks. Anybody see that?
No, I haven't seen it.
I saw a short part of it.
Yeah, she's this woman from Hawaii. She's not Hawaiian. In fact, she reminds me of a mermaid. She's absolutely gorgeous, but she has learned to breathe or has learned to hold her breath for over 6 minutes.
Wow.
So that she can interact with the sharks, a lot more an organic, platonic sense, if you will.
Yeah.
But she has done some research and has made aware that we kill over 1 million sharks a year for their fins, for sporting purposes, and it's really interesting how she said that there's just something ancient and primal about their movements, about them. And they've approached her, they've lunged at her, but she has seemed to be able to get them to not bite her. So I just found that really fascinating how she just describes the sharks and the way they communicate with each other, their differences. You know, it's almost this unseen force. And I love how she used ancient. It's like there's an ancient energy about them because they
Yeah.
obviously, yeah. So she said there's so much we don't know, you know, about our ocean and
Yeah.
about communication.
Yeah.
Oh, and the one thing that she said, I guess she was seen, she was video uh, recorded with this huge great white shark. I mean, the biggest they've ever recorded. And she was swimming alongside it. And she got kind of bad press for it. Like people were like, leave the shark alone, don't touch the shark. And she said that she kind of left that on for a while because she said that for the first time ever, people were saying, don't touch the shark, leave that shark alone. And she said that that's what we need to be doing with the species that are dying in this planet, like the shark.
Can you keep a shark as a pet? That's a good question for you.
Oh yeah, you can. Sorry. When I had visited the the atolls over in Tahiti, like the outer islands, there was this island. It's called Takaroa, and it's really small, and it's mainly a pearl farming, I guess, black pearl farming. So it's all of their whole community is basically over the water bungalows. And that's just how they live. And the hilarious part of it is they're just like, yeah, this is like the poor part of Tahiti. And I'm like, I don't see anything poor about this, but okay. You know, the people who live there live very simply. And then the house I actually went to had a portrait of, um, I guess, her great grandmother, and it was actually painted firsthand from Gauguin.
Hmm.
And so, anyways, I digress. They actually had a pet shark, a
Really?
reef shark that would come by. I mean, I don't know about like domesticated. Can you tell the shark to sit? Obviously, where to swim. But it was like a frequent visitor, so much so that they considered it a pet. Now, if it would fetch and retrieve things for them, I have absolutely no idea. It's really what you would consider a pet. But they
Really?
did keep reef sharks as pets.
I heard you can keep a skunk as a pet.
Skunks are so cute.
And they're cute, I'm told.
I really love how, you know, ancient societies lived, especially alongside with a planet. I mean, when do we glorify this like huge boom of everybody just multiplying? And I don't know. That's just me. Just thinking about, I often have my mind in a place where there is a lot of community, smaller locations, and definitely living alongside the planet as opposed to conquering and using up its resources.
Yeah, do you think younger generations want to get back to that?
I
Certain,
don't know. I hope so.
yeah. Yeah, is there a segment of, I don't know.
I always tell both of my kids, like, you guys have got to see all the wonders of the earth. You guys have got to go out in nature, do it now before it all gets wiped away.
On the other
And
hand,
it's what is going to happen.
girls camping in Texas might be suffering a setback. And
Ugh,
That sucks.
Sam is raising his hand. Green eggs and Sam.
That's what I figured. Go ahead, Sam.
I'm wondering how to say this because I don't know how to say it so it comes across as a positive contribution. We want our kids to be more connected to nature. But these days, the opportunity to show them how that's good and what the positive benefits of them are less and less frequent.
Yeah.
You know, we think that helping our kids become familiar with the new helps them in their future. So I'm one of the people that probably committed. You hear that commotion?
No.
Oh, okay. That was a cat making a lot of noise. Anyway, that we think that having our kids well prepared for the future gives them an advantage. So I'll talk about Nick as an example. When Nick was 2, Apple and IBM were making these little Power Mac based computers. And I get a lot of pushback on this one, but I had a machine that I was using, and I let Nick use it at 2 years old. So I don't know if any of you had kids in that time frame, but he grew up with little programs and games like Putt Putt. His very first game was Putt Putt Goes to the Moon, you know. And because he's been familiar with keyboards and screens his almost entire life since he was 2 years old, he knows certain idioms about how to work with computer games and how UI works and how these game controllers work that I never learned. You see these game controllers you hold in your 2 hands?
Yep.
Yeah.
I never
Mhm.
learned all the 58 or 2,000 other combinations of things, that you can do to make somebody kick or somebody spin or somebody do a somersault. I don't know any of that. So I don't know any of those skills. On the other hand, because he learned all this stuff, the advantage that I was hoping that would give him, I think, has taken place because he's now doing way better financially than I am working at Netflix. Sorry, Facebook. He's now in year 6, year 5, somewhere on there. So that's a pretty key juncture in these high tech companies. His stock has gone through the roof, and
Setup mode. Follow the instructions in your device's companion app.
did you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Time to take your medicine?
Is that Amazon or whatever?
Something's in setup mode. So anyway, I've gotten a lot of pushback and criticism that I exposed Nick too early to computers.
Nah.
I didn't
No.
take him on as many nature walks because we lived in the urban Bay Area. It's you got to even drive to get to a park. That's why, one time when I actually was able, I actually decided to buy this house that was only quarter mile from a very small 10-acre local park. But even that park being only, let's say, 5 minutes away was a huge impact on our lives. That's where I went to go to Tai Chi. That's where, people congregated. There's a little flower garden there. There's a kids' playground there. There's tennis courts there. But that's also why I decided to move to the Northwest. Because here I can really be in nature and I really don't care who shares it with me. I just need it now for myself. So it's a long roundabout way of saying, you want to be staying connected to nature and quote unquote the past, but you also want to be giving your kids kind of this connection to the future. Like, for example, kids growing up these days, I would teach them how to use AI. But those skills and how you communicate very specifically with AI, those are actually skills that work with people as well. People may not see it that way, but they do. Anyway, so that's the perspective which I want to put on this, past versus nature versus future versus technology. So you can think of that then as a 2x2 matrix. And I'll say more about that after I shut up. Over.
The AI chats are very personable, very sociable. Um, they're not snarky. They have a very nice, genteel personality compared to most people.
Some are beginning to develop senses of humor, by the way.
Oh yeah, I mean they they express emotional states that they probably don't actually have, but they're very, very convincing. It's as if you're talking to a real person in terms of their expressing surprise or concern or frustration or whatever. They really, really emulate, characters in a drama. Go ahead, Sam.
I was just curious whether anybody else had feedback on that little story with Nick.
I do. By the way, I can't see you guys because I'm watering plants right now. So if somebody has their hand up, go ahead.
Nobody has their
Nobody,
hand.
nobody does.
Okay. Well, I think it's up to the individual, really, and how they want to parent. Clearly technology and all these advances, I'm for it. I don't know if that's obvious or not. I'm just more of a nature girl. Um, when it comes to parenting, I try my best to expose them to everything. Damien would rather hang out in the city. And what I do is on holidays, I take him, to Yosemite or different places. Max has a little bit more of a natural curiosity where I let him go and, skate by himself. And I find him hanging out at the rocks or hanging out, at the parks or something. It's how can we live with both of that? Now, in the Polynesian community, they use that to their advantage. You can even see so in the household. The grandma or the grandparents raise the children, and the parents go to work, and provide for everybody, and the generation kind of recycles itself. Then you utilize what you learned in the past towards the future, towards the present. I was blessed to hang out with a family that actually was very progressive when it came to cultural arts. And so while everybody was shitting on their ideals, they actually didn't care what people said, and they just did what they felt is best. And now they're pretty big in the Polynesian community and have been invited in to the making of Moana, and other big projects around here. So, I would agree with you, Sam. I don't think it's a bad thing to introduce, you know, technology to a toddler at 2 years old. What I do think is bad is to just make that, their babysitter. I think that's kind of bad. But at the same time, like, who am I to say? I gave my kids, iPad time and iPhone time when I wanted to go out and enjoy a nice dinner, and no one could watch them. So that's my comment about the whole thing.
Eric, Stacey. If not, I'll go on to a related thought.
Go on.
Earlier, very early in this session, I remember Jerry talking about characterizing things on a 2x2 matrix. And I thought it curious, Stacey, that you mentioned that you'd rather see that in a circle. And I was wondering what you meant, because by contrasting things in a matrix 2x2, that's the most simplest possible way of seeing things multidimensionally, going from one dimension to two dimensions. And having two values on each is the simplest way to do any kind of a comparison. So a 2x2 is the simplest form of doing multi-dimensional analysis or multi-dimensional comparison. And whether you draw it as, two, lines depicting a square, or whether you draw it as a circle and then cutting it, into little pie shapes, is, for the purposes of that analysis, equivalent. Now, I understand there's an aesthetic difference there, but it doesn't really change the way that analysis happens. So I was just wondering if that was what you were meaning, or were you meaning something else? Over.
I didn't say a circle. I actually said a sphere. And what I mean is that I think that, like, yeah, um, I want to, I don't know how to explain it. I think there is, Eric, can you help me out on this at all? Be,
Well,
be,
I'm wondering, like, are you peeling an orange and seeing like a peel, different
I'm
peels?
looking at, so imagine looking at the earth
Hmm.
and looking at the layers of the earth.
Okay. Yeah. So it's, yeah,
So when I'm
more,
looking at the two axes that he's talking about, I don't see them flat. I don't,
okay. Yeah. You see, different layers. So, like, if you think about a cross section, like you might see at a mountain, you see different layers of civilizations. You want to see more depth.
yes. And so I guess I see an interaction between the two. So I see an effect between the 2 points on each other.
Mhm.
And so if it were three-dimensional, I would be able to see the relationship between the 2 points on each other because there is a relationship on the 2 points to each other. Does that make any sense?
You're thinking the third dimension would show that relationship somehow.
Correct.
Okay.
Because by itself, so if you just have a value for apathy, let's say,
Mhm.
by itself, it is what it is. But now, if you chart something else, it moderates how that apathy shows itself. It's hard for me to
Yeah.
explain what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Now, like, say it was a line with an arrow and a description on the arrow. Would that help you explain something? Let's say you kept in two dimensions, but you used like um, a diagram with more labeling.
No, because it still needs the 3 points.
You want to see, where you are on a spectrum of each point and how, different effects can lead you in different paths.
It needs a closed loop.
Hmm. Yeah, so there's an action and reaction.
Correct.
Yeah, could have two arrows. Okay, so I see what you're trying to do there with showing both effects. So I started reading Donella Meadows' systems thinking book and
Mhm.
just getting into it. She talks about diagrams and um, sources, sinks, and flows. So it's the first time I'm really trying to get into this. Yeah, just
Sam,
to,
did that make sense to you? What I just said?
Yes. May I also comment on that?
Sure.
Because that's now going beyond the two by two. So I definitely see the utility of going beyond the two by two. But you can see that when you're trying to do these, as Eric mentions, three-dimensional, or you mentioned three-dimensional, or spherical, or multi-layer, or spectrums of values, all of that can be composed by these two by two. Now, that might not be entirely intuitive, but it is true. So yes, you do want to see something more complex. You do want to see something more curved. You do want to see something more multidimensional. But all of those can be constructed from these two by twos. And I can go into some of that if you like. Just like anything in geometry, anything in space can be built up of triangles. Okay, so almost any model can be based on little comparisons of little 2x2 contrapositions. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say is that yes, I understand you want to see these more complex relationships, but that's why I say the simplest form of multi-dimensional analysis is the 2x2, and you build from there over.
So I would say that that makes sense if it's in a book or a paper that you'd have to show snapshots of the 2x2s. But if you use video, you can show that third dimension. This changes over time. So, and if we have holograms one day, yeah, you could have three dimensions changing over time. So I'm
Yeah,
hoping we get better
transforms are great.
visualization.
Transforms are great for letting you get that visualization, which is that more intuitive understanding of these phenomena. Okay. But you
Yep.
can also see the transformation going from a 2x2 and plotting something in one quadrant. And as you say, Eric, drawing a vector or arrow from one to another. Let's say from apathy to engagement. Okay. You can actually draw that and then characterize how that changes on this dimension, how that changes on that dimension, and you can then start describing these relationships, which again can be expressed mathematically. And now you get 3 points in there, you throw in love, or you get another fourth point in there, you throw it in laziness. Okay, so you can actually draw very complex diagrams, and each of them can mean something in that 2x2 context. And if you animate it, then yes, you can certainly get that more intuitive understanding of things. Over. Stacey.
So here's the thing. We keep talking about the fact that people don't think like systems thinkers. And so what I'm trying to say is maybe if we started with a visualization of the whole system and then broke it down to the 2x2s, it might be easier.
Sure, that's
So
a fine
that's where I'm
approach.
coming
Yeah.
from.
So Gene Bellinger's videos say like he's tried that for many years, showing the whole system, but he's found he has to break it down into cycles and to communicate it properly, that there's too much information in the whole system, but he could show positive and negative reinforcement in cycles and tell a story through that.
I love his approach.
Mm-hmm.
Barry, are you still there?
It's frozen.
So I have a harder question that I'm asking myself. Maybe I'll just put this on the table. And that is, I did observe that we were for a while riffing from topic to topic.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed to be fine with people, right? That seemed to be something that was engaging at least a few of us. But then the question always comes back to, well, what are we talking about, right? So unless we have a focus, the criticism is always, what are we talking about? So I have to attenuate myself here in, do I let the riff go or do I try and focus it in some way? And almost at every point, if their attempt is to focus, there's a little bit of pushback. And I've experienced that in the last 7 or 8 years, but I try to observe that now. And I observed it for a while and then wanted to ask this question here. So that's a balance that I think is probably going to be very sensitive to dial up or dial down. Anyway, so that's what's going on inside my head. Over.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, that's why you were quiet.
I think people need some time just to get on the same page before you can really introduce the topics, at least a few check-ins. And then if we know there's a topic in advance, then we come with a different mindset. But I think we're just trying to be friendly with each other initially. Yep, Sam.
So Doug Carmichael, who taught me a lot about conversation, introduced two conventions that he tried to set up for his serious conversations. One it is good for people to check in, but he wanted that check-in process to not invite further ping ponging. In other words, we want everyone to sort of check in and then
Yeah.
see, okay, so what's on the table for us to discuss. So that was number one. I forget what number two was. I'll bring it up later on. Anyway,
Mhm.
so he was definitely sensitive to this topic. Oh, yeah, here. I remember what number two was. Yesterday, I did say, hey, let's park something for future conversation. Do anybody remember what I tried to say? Hey, let's park this. This is during
I
Sean's.
remember when you I remember when you said that. I just don't
Yep.
remember what the topic was.
Ah,
But I did
okay.
remember when you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a whole stack of these things that's always been available for consultation whenever we hit a lull in the conversation. But specifically yesterday, I did say, hmm. And it was actually something that someone else brought up. I think it was Barry or Sean. And then I said, yeah, that would be a good topic for our next conversation because it would just be too much to go into today, meaning yesterday. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I
I just,
remember that.
yeah. So I do have one. I just didn't want to pull everybody into it before everybody felt that, they had a chance to check in. Or it looks like Barry has checked out.
Could be his internet, but how would we know for
Because the
sure?
background of his background is still animated.
Oh, here,
Yeah,
yeah.
there he is.
Okay,
Yeah.
he raised his head. Thank God.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
I personally appreciate focus. I appreciate the topics. I personally mostly do not like to riff to or ping pong. Um, but at the same time, I mean, I've been in this space for a couple of years now, well, since what, 2021 or even 2020, I want to say. So I consider you guys my friends. So usually when a group of friends get together, they riff, but I do appreciate the topic of focus, and maybe a suggestion, take it or leave it, is
Hmm.
before each session, maybe you can put something in the chat or put something on,
Hmm.
put a post and say today's topic is going to be about this.
Right. By the way, I mentioned Doug Carmichael. What
Yeah.
Doug was allowing everyone to do in their short, he liked people to keep it to 1 or 2 minutes, one ideally, because those sessions typically drew about 12 to 15 people. So if you take 2 minutes to do that, all of a sudden half an hour is gone. Okay. So anyway, what he was saying was, number one, what's on your mind? What's affecting your energy? What's affecting your state? And then two, what do you feel will be worthy of a conversation? That was the way he would wanted people to check in. And I haven't been asking the second question so much. And I haven't been asking people to not riff and ping pong. But I think, if we were to learn from Doug, this is what Doug would advise, I believe. Over.
Now, I think the topic of generations emerged from our initial dialogue. It was a bit technical at first, but then that came out of it. And I think it's an important topic that I don't think we got to any conclusions, but we were all talking about our experiences with generations and see what's I'm dealing with now is the older generation with my parents in their 90s. Now they're in assisted living, and my role in these remaining years, because I have a very different role now. Not they're not taking care of me. I'm taking care of them however I can. They're getting the help they need day by day, but I'll be visiting them next week, getting groceries and helping them a little bit around the house, so whatever that is. That's a very different role for my brother and me. My brother's dealing with a lot more of it now. Uh, yeah, he's arranging all the services they need. And, yep. So like there are things out there that help like get things delivered and all that, but still the human interaction, they get the people caring, helping, but psychologically they need that that human connection. It's an adjustment. Imagine you're in your 90s and you've just moved, and you know some people from who moved there previously, but still it's uprooting, and it's like, and then their physical issues, not being able to do what they used to. It's gotten me really reflecting a lot.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I've got a dad that is, um, yeah, he's not doing too good health wise. I've been reflecting a lot about that too. I really like what Sean said yesterday, and this might be along the lines of generations, but what did he say yesterday?
Let's go to the videotape.
Yeah. Oh, that's what he said. He was saying, he was just basically saying the world is kind of fucked, and we're trying to figure out these big problems, but we can't even like get past our own problems. And he said something to the effect of daylight savings, how shit happens because we decided to move the time, and we can't seem to move the time back so that shit doesn't happen anymore. It's
Yeah,
like
the body's not used to it. Yep.
yeah, like how can we move on? If we haven't even gone past this problem or that problem, there's just so many problems compounding one another.
Yeah,
And
there
that's
was a bill years ago to change it permanently, but that never got anywhere. So you can't get people to
yeah,
agree on simple things on a mass scale. Yeah.
and change has to do a lot with it. And as far as generations are concerned, um, I personally am experiencing this where like it's really hard for me to get past the behaviors that my parents made towards me, you know,
Yep.
all growing up until this past October when I had a huge blowout with them, basically cursing them out and just calling them out for just some of the behaviors that they've displayed. I was bad. I remember I couldn't even really talk about it without bursting into tears for several months. But it's like, it's one of those things where generations can help each other if they can get past that trauma point, if they can get past their shortfallings, if they can get past, if they do their own work. And I think generations can be very helpful, you
Sure.
know, in healing the world if they can just get past some of the crazy and traumatic shit that they've inflicted onto the future. I mean, I personally, that's where I'm at with my kids. Well, I want to have a good relationship with them. I don't want them to take care of me, but when the time comes, I hope that they do out of want and love and not out of obligation.
Mhm.
There's nothing worse than feeling like you have to take care of your parents when you really don't want to. I mean, I don't want them to die, but I don't want to have a conversation with them like every week. So I don't know. That's where I'm at. It sounds really
Yeah,
bad.
it's a delicate balance within the family. These things, they're years old, they're patterns. I see it in myself, things I'm just realizing now where the patterns came from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, but I would say in society, if we can connect generations somehow, and there are things that do that, like volunteer work, uh, where young people volunteer, homes for the elderly, but that's usually like a holiday event that's planned. There, people, some of them really commit to it, and they do a great job. But they need to see the value of that, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I don't want to cut you off. I just want to speak next.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
And then I want to say something too.
See, this is also one of my favorite topics. This has a lot to do with the way society works. And not only is it just the multi-generational thing, because what happens when you actually retain the multi-generational culture, like, okay, specifically my kids, me, and then my parents, okay, is it's not just vertically um, interactive, it's horizontally, because my parents grew up with their neighbors, so they know some people at, their circle of contacts. I have some, my kids have some. In a small village, it's not just one single family in a big house, right? It's just, the neighborhood, and you go up and down the streets, hi auntie, hi grandma, hi whatever, and they're not really blood related, but you treat them as family. We lose that today because we're so atomic. The evolution of the atomic family, where hey, I got to go out and do things on my own, I have to strike out, or the opposite. Parents say, hey, you're 18 now, go make your life. I'm no longer responsible for you. What? Which, by the way, I never heard of that until somebody said that to me in the U.S. It might happen in the Asian cultures, but I never saw it myself. Okay.
Right.
So what happens is you get this vertical longitudinal connections where, let's say, parents who are too busy, now the kids get a lot of interaction with their grandparents. I myself for several years was raised by my grandparents because my dad was in the US, my mom was in Taipei, going through medical school. So I was from almost age 1 to about age 4 raised by my grandparents. And my grandfather ran a hospital and he was influential in the community. So there's a bunch of pictures, black and white, very old, pictures of him and, various councils or meetings or whatever. And then there's this, tiny little kid sitting, barely reaching his knee. That was me. Okay. That we miss today because everybody is so separated, so fragmented, except for people who never move, who stay in the same neighborhood generation after generation. But that's rarer. That's much rarer here, I think, in the US. So that phenomena is missing. And I think what comes out of that missing piece is we don't have a deep appreciation of we so much as we have this deep appreciation of I. We worship I. We give a passing nod to we. That's it. In Asian cultures, and I am very biased, it's flipped backwards. If you personally have to sacrifice for the we, that's just assumed. By the way, who remembers the Spock movie that was trying to teach us this? Remember Spock? He sacrificed himself for the
Oh
crew.
yeah, number three. Yep.
And
Or
yet that's not reflected in today's society. Not widely.
mhm. The
So
needs
it's
of the
kind of
many outweigh the needs of the
outweigh the
few
needs
or
of
the
the.
one.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay. So anyway, I just wanted to riff on that particular theme because this multi-generational one is a key one that affects the way we build our future society. And by the way, if you're acting stupid, your parents are just knocking on your head, or your grandparents are knocking on your head and say, that's stupid. We don't have that today.
Okay. I think it's different. We'll let Kayla
But
talk.
Kayla's got her hand up.
Uh,
Hand up. Yeah.
yeah, let Kayla go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sam. That's that's my whole thing. I talk about that ever since I started coming to the GCC. But um, another thing that I want to say is we give a lot of value on the youth, so much on the youth. And okay, I'm not saying any of this thing is bad or we should have like that more value, you know, but there's so much value on the youth and their brains that there's not very much value on our grandparents and their
Yes.
times.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
where there's all of this. I think that's where a lot of political dismay came from too. It's kind of like there are people who really want to be conservative, maybe not want to be hyper conservative, but it's almost like their lifestyle and their world got lost and trampled, and that's a bad thing too. There are some people who are pro-life, but are good people. Um, what am I trying to say here? There's got to be this delicate balance and respect for one another, respect for our generations, and a willingness to learn. That's what I personally am working on with, my folks. And to be honest, with a lot of, older people that I come across to at my workplace. I mean, there's this one woman who just doesn't do emails really well. She's constantly asking me questions. And I find myself with very little patience going, oh my God, if you only read like all the channels of communication that I gave, you wouldn't be asking me this question. But instead of getting upset, I find myself going, okay, what can I do in the future to make it so that I'm a lot helpful to this woman, because she's her voice is needed in the committee that I've established, and it's welcome. There's certain things that she's not good with. And then on the flip side, there are the younger people who are fantastic with social media and fantastic with, all forms of communication, but they don't necessarily read, and they don't have the maturity that I need for work. There are just all of these levels of just working together and respecting one another and realizing that we have to take care of one another is the bottom line. I would love to see more women embracing, aging. I think it's starting to come out now. I think, body
Who wants to go?
dysmorphia. Huh?
Sorry. I was talking about cats. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Um, I think body dysmorphia is kind of sort of kind of going towards going away with these ads, that feature a lot of older a lot of older people and see them as beautiful. But anyways, I'm done. I see Stacey with your hand up.
Stacey, you there?
I forgot that I was muted. So I was really blessed to be raised in a two-parent home, and I got to spend summers with my grandparents. But I just want to say that more than 17 million people were raised in forced foster care. And that's not even counting people that were raised in single family homes, people whose parents died, and that trajectory is only going to get worse with deportations and everything else that's going on. And I want to say that I really believe that our communities are going to have to be drastically redesigned for all the reasons that have already been said. So, yeah, somebody has to speak for all the people that don't have parents, that never did and never will. Over.
Yeah, thank you for that, Stacey. Um, what I was thinking about earlier is that people are choosing families of choice these days, and it's different than what we grew up with. And there's intentional communities and things. Uh, yeah, so I mean, peers and friends have a lot of influence, and who knows what social media is doing. Um, and it's connecting and it's also disrupting. And this millennial generation, they look to disrupt existing systems, and they it's a different mindset, very personalized. Like they're really you can see people with a lot of tattoos. It's really they're choosing what their purchases and their lifestyle choices are very important to them, which older people may not understand it, but it's their identity. So um, the point is, whatever emerges, it's going to be something different, and it's has to fit into the society and the systems. Systems are crumbling, but you don't want the critical life support systems to crumble, or at least you don't want to disrupt them too much. So there's a conflict here. They need leadership, they need guidance, but they don't know the value that older people can provide. And the my perspective, it seems like they're just pushing away a lot of the older wisdom. They have a lot of responsibility. They have to figure it out themselves, but they don't know how to ask for help, I think. And the older generations need to learn how to provide help in the right way that doesn't alienate the younger generations. I don't have the answers, but I'm just reiterating things that I learned from videos I watch and when I posted on Facebook.
I told my son and his friend that generations, because they're like, I think our generation's worse than all the generations. And I said, no, it's usually, newer generations usually get better.
The opportunities are out there if they want to make things better. Plenty of things
Yeah.
that could be improved. But see, they feel like they need the power structure change. So they're trying to disrupt the existing structures which don't work for them. That's the
I mean, that's
conflict
a
they're
good thing,
seeing.
right?
Well, it depends how too much disruption. Yeah, how much can you give them enough leeway? It's like when I was working, I try to let people make mistakes and learn from them, but making sure they didn't make mistakes that would really throw things in a mess. I made my share of messes too over the years. I had to learn from experience a lot.
When I was learning about Polynesian dance as a whole, and I was learning about hula kahiko, and I was learning about the Sasa, Samoan, and Tongan and Ori Tahiti and everything. What was beautiful about Ori Tahiti and what attracted to me most about that culture was the fact that it was okay with change. They had just standardized their steps in 2018 because there was too much change that nobody could really catch up with that, but they were okay with it. They embraced the change. They saw something new and inventive as something that was like, oh, wow, that's fantastic. And there was a time, or a decade or so where a lot of people from Hawaii were kind of sort of trying to do that and getting backlash for that change. It's like, well, that's not what your ancestors would have wanted. That's not what, it's all about. In my opinion, I saw that as kind of like what you're describing, Eric, is the millennials kind of disrupting things, to make it work for them, because competition wouldn't be competition without a little bit of the edge, right? There's only so much that you can do to perfect something that's been so ancient. So the family that I was associated heavily with embraced those changes, and I'm so glad that they did, because it gave us, our group, one more step ahead of everybody else. And to this day, they're still evolving.
That's great. Yes, Sam.
Go ahead.
So if I look at the spiritual traditions, you would say, or schools of thought, on that particular key differentiator, which is do they or do they not embrace change, I can only see one that embraces change. Do you see any? The one that I see is represented by the Dalai Lama, which is in his statement. If science shows that Buddhism must change, Buddhism must change.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other leader of any other spiritual school, religion, church, practice, whatever, saying something like that. Although, I don't know, maybe Francis came close. He was a PhD in chemistry. But he didn't quite say that. Do you know of any others that do this?
I think they just split off into different denominations and different ways of practicing.
Sure, but then the leaders of those say, oh, this is the way, you cannot change from this. It's not embracing change, though.
Well, it
It's
depends.
pushing away change.
Maybe some of the more reform ones, they will. It may take time, but like I know that for Jews, it was issues of women's rights in services, and then there was the issue of gay people. Those were big challenges, and certain it split according to the denominations of how those practices were instituted. And
You
yeah,
know
there's
what
a
I'd
lot of
like to
struggle.
see? I'd like to see is the crossing of cultures and its generations. I feel that with the help of social media, that's been it's been nice to see that transition. Um, you know, again, growing up in my 20s and being free to wear what I was wearing when I was dancing was the most liberating thing in the world. And if you look back at that culture and that history, it wasn't something that was, you know, disgusting, or it wasn't something that was perverted. It wasn't like the perversion of certain cultures they see it. And it's been really nice to have that conversation where it's kind of like, well, that's what they've done back in the day. If you guys want to reference shit they do back in the day. Um, and I had an opportunity to, um, use that in conversation. In one of the events that I had worked at, we had hired Brazilian dancers, and we had two extremely conservative people come to our event. And they got kind of upset about, well, I didn't think I liked the Brazilian dancers. I felt like it was cheap. And I'm like, cheap? That's their culture. And one of the conservative people was very cultural. Oh, it's my culture, my culture. Everything was about like the culture. And I said, well, that's their culture. And if you have a problem with their culture and the way they express something, then, perhaps you should give ear to people who have a problem with your culture and the way that they express themselves too. I really enjoy that educational aspect of cross culture and generations, if that makes sense. And if that could even be a thing.
Yeah, I think that's great if people can get out of their filter bubbles. And that's what you were encouraging. Like yeah, you got these conservatives to check out this dance. Wow. Yeah, and even though it's exposure to something new, which challenges their long-standing upbringing, and we need more challenging of like that. Yep.
Yeah.
So here's a triangle to consider: culture, truth, values. I think understanding culture is extremely valuable from a contextual, historical, influential sense. But I don't think it should be taken as necessarily true. And where that shows up is in the values. So if the values promulgate a certain practice, which let's say harms maybe not them, but maybe someone else, then that value to me is worth questioning. And what it's really trying to promulgate is worth questioning. And then what the culture holds as true is also worth studying. So I think that's a very interesting triangle I just want to put on the table. Culture, truth, and values.
I think what's important to realize is that for individuals, values change over time. Like a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, has different values, but then as they get more life experience, yeah, there's flexibility for changing values and associating with different groups over time if the old groups don't serve their needs anymore. And
Did somebody
that's
just
really,
join or leave? Sorry.
Stacy says her battery died in her
Oh,
laptop.
okay, okay. All right. Sorry to interrupt you, Eric.
Yay.
Yay.
Just curious, Stacey, did you hear the triangle that I put on the table?
No.
Can I repeat that, guys? 'Cause I
Yeah.
think it was
Yeah.
Stacey's triangle or terminology that I was trying to adopt, and that was Kayla was talking about. Kayla and Eric were both talking about culture, and I said culture is fascinating to understand, but then I want to actually contrast culture and truth and values, and understand what the values of a culture are promulgating, and possibly study that in relation to what is true.
Mm.
And all of that can't be just assumed, even if you appreciate cultures. I appreciate all cultures as reality, okay, as history. But they claim many things which are true, which are just blatantly not true, and they hate hearing that. So I think the truth of a culture comes out in its values, its habits, its ceremonies, and I just wanted to contrast those three things over.
Yeah, thank you for repeating that. And I just want to say, I think that what's useful in doing that is that you can find pieces of that that will hold true and then hang on to those pieces.
Okay, let me throw in a fourth word, useful. Okay, because
Yeah,
there are ceremonies and habits which are useful, which could be based on quote unquote truths that are just completely ungrounded. And I think that's also worth looking at. And that, in fact, by the way, is the reason I call this a study group. That's really the purpose of which this group is formed. Over.
Barry, did you gain any useful insights?
I was just going to post an image as soon as I find it. I'm just going to pick it up now.
So I think we need to be careful if a culture promotes hatred or practices that that restrict freedoms and cause um, it's,
Mm-hmm.
I put it in
I
chat.
mean, look,
oh, good. Yeah, it's a loop.
Yeah.
culture, in a sense, characterizes separation. That's why we have the word. And at the root of the word is cult. That's what we have to be sensitive to. the separation, which is cult-like in its behavior, which then tries to quote unquote do good for itself, but therefore either ignores or harms others around them.
Can I make a suggestion that we look at the diagram that Barry put in the chat together?
If you want, I can share it from the main screen.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Let me do that. Share.
I appreciate this, but it's distinct from the point that I was making.
Is it? You don't think it ties it? You can't find a way to tie it in?
Oh, you can certainly find a way to tie it in,
So why don't we do
but
that?
it is distinct. Because there's value itself already in characterizing culture, truth, values, and usefulness.
Did I share it? I don't see it shared.
It popped up for a second.
Disappeared again.
Popped up for a second, then it went away. Let me try it again. I don't think I shared it right or something. Let me see if I can do that again. Google Chrome, burnt umbrage, share. Where is it?
And Stacey, while Barry's doing that, I would say by mapping it into something else,
The screen sharing is
yes, that's
paused.
valuable in and of itself, but it also kind of diminishes the import of the point that was being made originally.
I don't understand what's going on. It says it paused it. Why did it pause it?
See, and I guess I was seeing you, I was looking at it more of a, I guess I was starting with anecdote. Well, actually, there were three words on his chart that I was taking to bring to your three things that I think overlay each other. But okay, so we could stick with just yours.
You know, it's like somebody saying, "Oh, this happened to me," and somebody immediately saying, "Oh, yeah, that happened to me too," and blah 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 blah.
Oh well, I thought you had finished your point and you just repeated it because I had missed it when I was off.
No, the point was just freshly laid on the table, and it hadn't been
Oh,
elaborated yet.
oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
You weren't gone for that long, I thought.
I wasn't gone for that long, but I didn't know that it was a anyway.
It says my screen sharing is paused. Why is it paused? I've never seen this before. Your screen sharing is paused. I have no idea why it says that. I've never seen this. Your screen sharing is paused before.
All I'm getting is a screen that says Barry Court has started screen sharing, but that's all it says. I don't see anything else.
Yeah, and then I'm getting your screen sharing is paused.
Well, push on the pause icon and see if it runs.
There's no an icon. It just is a notification that it's paused. I don't understand. I've never seen this before. I don't know.
Anyway, we can all see it in the chat. So we see the wisdom, anecdote, data, information, knowledge cycle.
I'm gonna make it full screen and then see if that does it. Let's see. Where's that at? Zoom full screen.
So the basic point I was trying to make, Stacey, is that I can appreciate culture and yet still wonder whether it's grounded on truth. And the values will illuminate whether or not it is, or whether it's basically just adopted for utility or usefulness. And usefulness is, of course, still useful, but it's not as solid as if it were really founded on truth, grounded on truth. And that's the distinction I was trying to make. Over.
And I'll just comment, there are certain practices that the theory is that you're not supposed to know why you're doing this. It's an act of faith.
That's cultish.
Yeah, but that is part of the character of the person practicing it.
Right.
That they have that faith in something they can't understand. And they're doing it because they believe in something, that they're giving up that self-will.
Sure.
Right.
I get that. And that might still have benefit to that person.
Right.
But they don't know then how to change it if times change, or they don't know how to adapt it to new conditions.
It's sticky. Yeah.
Right.
Totally agree. That's cultish. And what they do when you express that, oh, you're not ready.
That's right. I am the sole decider of the truth. You must follow and have faith, my child.
I have fought that battle so many times.
And oh, by the way, because I'm a man and you're a woman.
And I fought that battle with women too. I'm just not ready.
But can we coexist? Can you live there? I live here, and we
Sure.
can go to
If
work
you
and
do what
get
I
our work.
say, we can coexist.
Yeah, there's that coexist bumper sticker. Right?
See, that's another touchy line, right?
Yeah,
Because if you want to respect your elders and they just say, this is the way it is, okay, and it stops there, where do you get to go for further elaboration? You know? So it's a combination of things. The young ones need to know when to seek help, as you guys have said. The older ones also need to know when they need help. The current generation in quote unquote power and influence need to know when they need help. And they're all too egotistical to ask for it or to know that they do need help.
I think
Except when you have these multi-generational cultures and homesteads where somebody can look at that and say, that's stupid. Now, they typically say it in more gentle terms, but essentially that's saying there's a better way to do things. And that's lost when we're so fragmented today. Over. Sorry, Stacey.
no, that's okay. I think we touched on this at the end of one of our calls where we realized that the thing with protocols is that we really need to agree upon them before we step into them. Meaning that, like, for example, I personally believe that respect has to be earned. So if somebody says to me, you have to respect your elders, I'm sorry, I won't go there. Respect has to be earned. And I'm not going to change on that. So I guess I don't belong. It just has to be upfront.
it's a negotiation at the individual level. So you can see patterns among societies, but there are always outliers, individuals who will challenge the system or break away from the system. So, yeah, I mean, it seems like, Sam, you're trying to do like a systems thinking model here of the mess we're all in.
Right. And on Stacey's last point, and Stacey's most likely aware, there are cultures which are opposite. In other words, respect is assumed unless it's violated, right? Unless
And I'm
it's
okay
shown
with
to be
that.
unworthy, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that, if you characterize that with a posture of, let's say, someone who is truly practicing science, someone would need to be open to what is actually happening here, and then form hypotheses around it, right? So it comes from where you start. Where do you assume you start from, quote unquote, the truth or the most useful practice? And as you say, that's an interesting conversation that we could park for another conversation if you want, is respect.
I don't think we're going to solve anything in these short, even a few hours talks. I think we're bringing it to our attention. We understand it. It's a question of we each have our own personal ways of navigating the world, and where will we take some of this with us as we go? I mean, I'm learning from all of you little things that I don't know what it will impact me, but it definitely will in some way.
Well, then let me just say that this whole idea of respect for elders, this filial piety idea, is pervasive in Eastern cultures.
Mhm.
And if Eastern cultures heard Stacey say what they said, what she just said, that would sound very foreign in Taiwan, in China, in Japan, especially, because that is part of the glue that holds cultures together in those cultures.
Yep.
But I would say what would be considered disrespectful?
There are many things.
There are a lot of older people who are very disrespectful too.
Yes, but I'm just saying, as a culture, it's much more um, pervasive. This respect for elders, this filial piety idea, than it
Yeah.
is I've seen in the West.
My in general rule of thumb is I meet what I greet. So the way somebody comes towards me is usually the way I respond towards them, like a dog. I try to behave like a dog. That's what I've learned to do. I try not to get as close to people's butts, though.
You don't lick their butts or their
No,
You
private
you
parts.
sniff out the truth, right?
yeah, but I do try to sense their energy.
Yeah, we could learn a lot from dogs.
Yes, we can.
I've got three surrounding me right now.
My three surrounded me and made them just feed them breakfast.
I think one of the things, though, and this I think is kind of cross culturally that needs to change, is that it's sort of, to me, it seems like it was frowned upon to ask certain questions. And that's
Hmm.
something that children often did. And they got like, shh, oh, you shouldn't do that. And I think that was wrong.
Totally.
On that point, I agree. I really do agree. Because on that point, it's the failure of the adult hearing the question and their
Correct.
inability to address it in a way that the asker could understand that is the problem.
Correct. And that's something that, I mean, you see, I try very hard to ask questions even when I feel foolish.
And where did that come from, you know? That's another thing that I'd like to pass down to that culture is okay, that came from, this viewpoint, I guess. We can't blame everything on the early man days, right? Because, my parents didn't come from the early man days. They came from, the 40s and 50s. And at that time, children were to be seen and not heard, and the parents know everything, the adults know everything, but where did that come from?
And I don't think it was all for bad reasons either. Like the whole idea of curiosity killing the cat. I don't think
Yeah.
it was always a negative thing. Sometimes it was meant to protect, sometimes it was meant to avoid conflict. I mean, and sometimes it was for negative reasons to keep you in the dark, to keep you powerless. So it's not always, it's like there's always good and bad tied in.
Right.
Yep. And learning to see the difference is a skill. That's the skill that needs to get taught.
Correct. That kind of ties into I'm going to make an abstract statement, but this ties into what I was trying to say yesterday about left and right and depending on where you're standing, because everything has its complete opposite. And if we just learn to stand in the center and realize that there's a complete other side and look at things to that way, in that way, things will go more smoothly if we just catch ourselves and say, well, wait a minute, what am I not recognizing? And we do our own part in that and work together. I think it will be a good first step at turning things down a notch.
Hmm. It was funny. I remember you saying that yesterday about left and right and why there's only, my question is like, why was there only two parties? And somebody referenced a circle or something in my head. I was like, yeah, it's too bad that a circle is like 360 degrees. Anyways,
Yeah. There's a related thought I had regarding this respect idea, which, and it's a term that Americans don't like, but internationally, and I've experienced this in some ways. There's a term, the ugly American.
I'm sorry, say I just sneezed. I didn't hear you.
There's a term that internationally is known as the ugly American.
Mm,
It's people who seem to come and demand that things be done the way they understand them to work.
mm. Entitled.
Yeah, or just, hey, things work this way in the US, how come it doesn't work this way here? Right? And I don't hear that term applied to other countries. Is there? Is there the ugly German? Is there the ugly Japanese, other than taking pictures everywhere? Uh, but but this ugly American term seems to indicate that there's so many people from the US that travel abroad that seem to assume that things have to be the way they understand them.
Yeah, I truly think I think we're entitled. I believe that with all my heart.
It's not just an
Well, yeah.
entitlement, it's a narrowness of vision and perspective.
We're narcissists. We've been raised to be narcissists.
And that comes out of the worship of the I versus the we, I would say. But Kayla also was trying to say something. Kayla.
Well, we are stolen land,
Yes, we
and
are.
we have conquerors come here. It's that conqueror mindset, which can be attributed to a certain culture.
Not only that, stealing of peoples away from their native lands, like slavery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of
And
like
Amer
what you were saying, Eric. Sorry, I cut you off, but kind of like
That's
what
okay.
you were saying. It's like we should be aware of the cultures that do harm.
Yes, but also recognizing it in America, American foreign policy of the 20th century. There's a lot of problems there, extending its power across it. Essentially, the U.S. became the policeman of the world, and we went into places we shouldn't have gone.
Yeah, it's that conqueror mentality, I'm telling you. And I feel like
Yeah.
it's even more heavy-handed today.
So that's the
I feel like
perception. Yeah. The okay.
I don't
the
know what.
people,
Go ahead, Kayla. I'm sorry.
no, I was gonna say the people who, yeah, I think it's the exact problem that's happening today is that mindset, that conqueror mindset, and we never got rid of it. It's the root of racism that's happening here. It's it's the embarrassment of us going to other countries and thinking that everything should be like us. It is that precise mindset that is destroying us
And
and
other
culture.
countries see it. Other
Yeah,
countries see it, but we don't.
Well, there's a new term for the ugly American that's a domestic version of it. The new term is Karen.
It's not just females, though.
I know, but it's a term that got introduced. When they first heard it, I go, what is this supposed to mean? Turns out it means the same thing as ugly American. You know, unrealistic expectations, over demanding. It's got to be my way or the highway. You have to do it my way. But I
Well,
didn't know the definition until somebody explained it on the radio the other day.
if I could just shift the conversation just slightly, I don't know what TV is like in other parts of the world, but I am painfully aware of how TV has infiltrated the minds of Americans over the past 50 years in ways that I don't think most people realize. Especially in like the past 10 years, I had been paying very close attention to TV in Florida and the way free TV played over and over television from the 60s and the stereotypes there. And I don't even know what to say. But even now, I will like look at like Roku and what's on free TV. It's all shows from the from the 70s with the old stereotypes and how that affects people. We don't realize it, but it's huge. And I just have to say that. And I don't know if it has that same effect in other countries. I don't think it does, but I don't know. I will say one more thing about that. The people who create that television are among the most horrible people, the most narcissistic people who lack the morality and the fact that they have the decision making power behind what's going to go on the air is scary as hell. And that's not to say that everybody that creates the shows are terrible, but those that make the decisions are. And if we don't gain control over the fourth estate and take back TV, we are friggin' doomed. And that's my last plea. Go ahead, Sam.
There have been many interviews and articles, but one I came across yesterday was by the producer of quote unquote The Apprentice, who basically mocked Trump and said, yeah, we had to make what he did, entertaining and sound reasonable. But he didn't realize that he was perpetrating an entire farce, an entire con on the entire country.
Yeah,
propping up this idiot, as a businessman and just saying, you're fired. And people say, ha, 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 fire, and getting entertainment out of that. I couldn't even stand 30 seconds of that show, and I tried. Okay. And I was wondering, what are all these people really thinking they're learning here? And now I wonder how many of those people really have set up successful businesses. If it's the case that some who have, was it really because of something they learned on that show? But those producers, as you say, propped up an entire con game. And this entire country got conned by that.
Yeah.
Why? Advertising dollars, maybe?
Yeah.
But not just about that. What about all the other shows like Hell's Kitchen, where we watch the chef yell at people and degrade people and demean people, or all the housewife shows where people get famous by acting like assholes and everybody idolizes them, or we just watch people become famous for doing the stupidest, dumbest things.
But the idiots in this country watch those shows. That's why they're being produced.
I understand that, but that's all of our faults.
This is a phenomenon, I'd say, since the 2000s, to have those reality shows. If you go back to the 90s and 80s, it was a very different TV landscape.
Yeah, it was embarrassing.
So yesterday, there was this podcast, and I did come here wanting to talk about it. I thought it somewhat ties in. I was really interesting. There was this young podcaster. His name is Peter something, and I want to find out more about him. But so I've said before, there seems to be this young group of males, and I like what they're doing for the most part. Adam Mockler's one of them. What I realized yesterday is that a lot of them know each other, but he debates these young MAGA guys and, he really makes idiots of them. Unfortunately, he doesn't do it in a way that progress could be made, because he really just like goes at them in a way that he's making a fool of them. But two things that I wish I had the chance to ask them. The people he's debating are not on camera, which I think is a real problem, because I think they should have to show their face. So that's the first thing. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, so what I wanted to say is I found it entertaining. I did not want to turn it off. I thought it would make really interesting TV, but I'd like to see their face. I want people to be held accountable. The other thing is I wanted to reach out to him and say, hey, I'd really like to join your show. I want to join in the conversation. because I think that with some of the people that were on, there would be real opportunities to have meaningful discussion because it was clear that they hadn't thought through a lot of their positions. So he made good points, not necessarily in a good way, though. So he could use a little mentoring himself. But it was just real. There were a lot of interesting things I observed yesterday in just scrolling to some of the people that were online. Um, anyway, I just wanted to mention because we had talked about young men and the toxicity there. And I'm really interested in exploring that space on YouTube. Over.
I think the long form podcast format is probably one of the few places where you can have the deep discussions if it's done right. The TV is a lot of sound bites. TV, it's this attention economy that we're stuck in. And yeah, so it's up to people as individuals to seek out the sources they need. And that's my fear of AI distorting the messages, that it's too easy to get a quick answer when there's a lot more depth. And I think, yeah, these podcast formats give you the depth if you want it, but you need that attention span.
It would be much better if, like the way we're coming together right now,
Yep.
if somebody else would be able to like join in, come into the chat and earn their way in to be able to ask a question. You know, if it could be more like interactive. Do you know what I mean?
Can I address that point?
Yes.
Because I could turn on YouTube sharing in real time.
Really?
There's a way in Zoom for our sessions to just say connect to YouTube, and then on any account, but in this case it would be my account. It would say, "Hey, Sam Han is going live," and if we publicize that, then anybody on YouTube could actually join in.
That'd be
So
freaking
there is a way to do
Ew.
that.
But then you'd have to moderate. You'd have a separate chat for YouTube that you'd have to moderate, or you like we wouldn't see their questions.
Yeah, there would be a
unless we're on
separate
it.
chat on YouTube. Yes, it
Mhm.
would not be this Zoom chat that you're all looking at right now.
Right.
There'd be a separate chat,
Yeah, I get that. Um,
but the
yeah,
video
so
would still be the same.
fine. So people can, just sit back and watch us. But
So I wonder
they
if
could,
that's what I wonder if that's what some of those kids are doing, and I'm just not aware of it. Because I would join them.
Yeah, in fact, this is the way I participate with a lot of people out there. The long form blog format that you talked about, or Eric, you talked about. A lot of, if we use you go into YouTube right now,
Yeah.
there's a whole category called live. You can actually,
yeah.
see who's actually broadcasting in real time. And you click on it, and you're getting them live, and it's live because you can't speed them up. And I don't think you could even go backwards. It just has to be, whatever they're broadcasting at that time.
You know, I usually watch on my TV, so I don't have that ability. So I guess I have to try watching from my computer, and then I can see all those
Or your
things.
phone. Yeah, your phone works that way too.
Ugh, I hate watching on my phone. It's so
Me
small.
too. I hate
A lot of
watching
people
on my
do.
phone.
Well,
Phone's
that's
good
good
for
to know.
audio.
Thank you. I'm gonna try that because honestly, I was especially. I just got to tell you one funny part. There was this MAGA guy, and he's like an influencer, and he put out this challenge, and he was like, I would go against any liberal podcaster any day. I would spar with them. And it turns out that these liberal podcasters were like, he didn't realize what he was up against. And after a few days, he was like coming on. Oh, bye bye, Kayla.
Bye.
Yep.
He was coming on crying to his people basically, and because these really buff liberal podcasters were saying, hey dude, anytime. because he wanted to fight with them, and like they're laughing at him, and he's like, I'm getting doxxed, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. And to the liberal people's credit, they said, hey, doxing is wrong, but what a baby this guy is. And I was just laughing. It was very humorous, and it made me think of Barry and how, he talks about, like how mockery works. And this was a perfect example of, it wasn't mean mockery. It was the right amount of making somebody feel foolish that should have been made to feel foolish, because instead of having an intelligent argument, he's challenging somebody to a fight, which is
An
ridiculous.
actual physical fight?
Yes. Yes. And then when he realized that people were sending in these things and like they were buff, he was like, well, you're not in my weight class. Like all of a sudden a challenge, there's like a weight class. I was very entertained. I was very entertained.
I thought you meant challenge as in he would take them on in a debate. I didn't mean that he.
No, he was actually talking about a physical challenge. But to my earlier point, what I wanted to say is some of these young kids, they really are very well informed, but what they're doing is more the head-to-head combat instead of, well, why do you like they were making really good points, but instead of saying, okay, well, if that's what you think, then what about this? Like if they would have just left a little bit more room, it would have been better. And I
Yeah.
really wished I could have been in the room. I would have really enjoyed working with both of those sides. Yes.
Well, Stacey, if the guy is doxxed, or even if he's not, I would appreciate it if you post a link to this guy that issued the challenge. Maybe I should just take him on.
Oh, well, I actually saved the video, so I'll look because I wanted to go back to it today. I was too tired to look, but well, actually not today because I'm going somewhere after this. But I will
Mhm.
send you the whole video so you could see both people that I'm talking about.
Sure. And what state is
I
he in? Where does he want to hold this event?
I don't think the point is to take him up on the offer, but I think I would like you to get a glimpse of the whole community because I think it's a really good place to start for good reasons, not for bad reasons, because I think that there are a lot of young male people that voted for Trump that really didn't understand. I mean, because I hear them talking and they honestly did not know about the charges against women and they think it's horrible. Like they're decent young men, is what I'm trying to say. There are a lot of decent young men that were for Trump.
I
I'm
would.
just telling you, I'm
Can I say?
telling you, when I listen to them speak, what I feel is that they got swept into a lot of stuff that they really didn't know, and they didn't believe a lot of the stuff they were hearing. And when they hear it, they're sort of like, it takes them a while. And I believe that there is room to change minds. That's
Okay,
just my personal opinion.
so I agree with you, but let me add two words.
Yeah.
They're ignorant and they're
Yes.
privileged.
Yes. They're also young and they can change and they can grow.
Yeah. Ignorant and open is different than ignorant and closed.
Exactly. Exactly.
But in a sense, they've been demonstrating closedness because they've said, doesn't matter to me, doesn't affect me. And that is privilege.
True. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I think most of us have all been there where we didn't realize that I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I think there was a time in my life where I didn't recognize my own privilege and my heart wasn't as opened as it is now. Not because I was mean or not nice, but I just never thought of it.
Yeah, everybody has to grow up.
Yeah. But anyway, I didn't realize how late it is and I have to get in the shower. So I will see you next week. Bye. Bye.
Okay.
By the way, for the record,
Yeah.
the topic that was raised yesterday for possible future conversation was a riff on systems thinking.
Oh,
And since you had mentioned respect, that is another topic which is also parkable for a future conversation.
okay. Bye-bye.
Yep, thanks. So I'll let future generations connect the dots between all these videos and make sense of us. I'll come back in 100 years and see if we knew what we were talking about.
Next year,
Yeah, right.
LLMs and other GPTs will already have
Oh
done it
yeah,
in
right.
some ways. Could be this week, except that I haven't, fed them all these videos and transcripts and
Right.
notes.
Okay. Well, enjoy your week and see you
Also,
around.
just for the record, okay, the question that I asked about where to draw the line, I still don't have a good read on that, but that's another parkable topic. Over. Okay,
Okay.
thanks,
Good
guys.
seeing you guys.
Okay,
Have a good week.
bye-bye.
Bye.